I have the easy part this evening. My name is Kevin DeBose. I'm Director of Housing and Neighborhood Development for the City of Knoxville. I get to tell you about what we're doing and introduce our awesome staff, and then I get to sit down okay? And let them run with it. So there's this thing that HUD requires. It's called the Consolidated Plan. And what it is more or less a comprehensive plan for community development programs. And it's not a direct strategic plan, although what it does, it provides a platform for other plans to work with it. So I'm a city planner by training, and plans should be consistent, coordinated, and continuous. And so what we try to do is create other documents that are consistent with this consolidated plan, coordinated, so that we can have continuous plans of service delivery. And so this plan will govern the next 5 years. So this is a pretty big deal, what we're doing tonight. Tonight represents the final meeting. We have been at this since August. And you'll hear more about how the public participation went. I am very, very pleased with the community engagement in this. And out of that, we have some priorities and we have a 1-year plan. But what we won't be doing today, we won't be talking about the sales tax. We won't be talking about individual strategic plans, but more overall, what we heard from the community and how that's correlated in our planning document and how it will be reflected in this first year. Got that? All right. I also want to mention before we go further, we have Vice Mayor Smith in the back. Why don't you raise your hand, Vice Mayor? Let's give him a applause. And I think I noticed Councilwoman Amelia Parker online. So I think she can hear you. And I noticed several, and then we have former Council Member George Wallace in attendance. We have an esteemed group this evening. And I also noticed several candidates for office. And I'm not going to mention all your names because I may leave someone out, but if you're here, why don't you raise your hand so we know who you are and where you are sitting. All right, now I get to introduce the stars of tonight. Our team from the Housing and Neighborhood Development Department who worked hard on this project for a long time. So let me start with our Community Development Administrator, Linda Russ. You'll be hearing from her a lot this evening. Linda is responsible for compliance on all of our federal programs. So she keeps the city in compliance and keeps me out of the newspaper, all right? So she is very appreciated. And a couple of our team members here with us, Bailey Walker standing there, and you'll be hearing a lot from her, and Sherry Burke. Bailey, Sherry, and Ellie, raise your hand, Ellie, work with Linda on our grants administration team. And then we have another team that is our Disability Services Office, and that's Stephanie and Misha. They're not here this evening, but grateful for them. And then we have a housing development section that's headed by Shana Walker, and she has an outstanding team. I think you're the only one here this evening, but there may be someone online. And then from our neighborhood revitalization team, Jillian Love and Kathy Ellis. I want to thank them. Also, she's not here, and I'm not sure she will ever hear this or not, but many of you know Hope Ely. Hope recently moved on to another opportunity. She's still part of the family. I told her she can come home anytime. But I want to especially recognize her because Hope has some blood, sweat, and tears into this process. And so we are really grateful for her. And also a couple of other employees, Ava and Foley, and Thomas, what's Thomas' last name? Cooper. Thomas. Sorry, Thomas. I'm 55. Grateful for them. So, yes, we got some work to do. You're going to hear a lot about this process and then give you an opportunity to speak into it further. Without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to Linda.
Yep.
All right.
Great. I hope you all are okay with me sitting down. A couple of other people I just want to recognize. Mike Dunthorne is here this evening. Beth Bacon, I think, is probably watching online, and hopefully you can hear us online. Did I hit that?
Nope, you don't have to do anything.
I don't have to do anything.
Yeah, you just sit there.
Answer myself. Okay. So I wanted to talk with you real quickly about our agenda tonight. So as Kevin discussed, we're going to talk about the draft 5-year plan. That's the consolidated plan. We'll talk about our community engagement process. We'll talk about our HUD funding and some regulatory and budgetary constraints and our goals and objectives. Then we'll talk more specifically about funding for our year 1 annual action plan. So HUD does not give us our funding for all 5 years. They give it to us 1 year at a time. So we know what our funding is for the year that actually starts today, July 1. So we'll be talking a little bit more in detail about that. And we'll talk about the timeline and how you can still give input on the plans. And then we'll have some breakout groups for feedback. Some housekeeping issues. So it's a hybrid meeting. We are doing this meeting online through Teams and also obviously here in person. If you're here in the room and you haven't signed in, we encourage you to do that. And you can put your name and organization in the chat function if you're online. The meeting will not be recorded, but we will be providing the slide deck, and we'll have that on our web page either tomorrow or Thursday. There are 2 websites that I want to direct you to for more information. We set up a dedicated web page for our consolidated plan last August, and it's www.knoxvilletn.gov/consolidated plan. You can find the draft plans there, and they're still draft at this point because we need to hear from you. We want to continue to get feedback from the public through Monday. And then we'll incorporate all that feedback into a final plan. If you go to our main webpage, which is knoxvilletn.gov/development, you can find out more information about some of our housing programs, what we fund in terms of homelessness, and other information about our department. We ask you to hold your questions, if you will, until the end of the presentation, and we're going to break up into small groups, and we're going to answer questions and take your feedback. Let's see, the online participants will be in one large breakout group. If you are not comfortable, not everybody is comfortable speaking publicly, so if you have a question or a comment, you are more than welcome to write it on an index card, and those are at the back of the room. If you want to grab an index card, you raise your hand and someone will bring one to you, and we will take those back with us. And if you need to leave early, you're more than welcome to do that. I think I needed to cover that the bathrooms are at the back of the building in that little hallway. If you need to use the restroom, please get up at any time you feel comfortable. And if you have to leave, that's fine. You can always email me your feedback. And my email is L for Linda, lrust@knoxvilletn.gov. All right. So the consolidated plan sets goals and high and low priority objectives. It's a strategic plan, as I said, that has no funding attached to it. It's required by HUD every 5 years, and it covers a period of time starting today, July 1, 2025, through June 30th, 2030. It requires extensive community engagement, and that's the part I think that we really enjoy doing the most. We really love hearing from you. We've thoroughly enjoyed this process that we officially kicked off in August. And I see many familiar faces here and really appreciate how you've been involved in the project. And we're going to talk a little bit more about what we learned from that and what we learned from you. It involves public participation and also consultation with our community partners. Some of the people who work in nonprofit organizations, foundations, local businesses to help to give us a little bit more, I guess, boots on the ground information that we may need. The annual action plan is, they are each year. So you have this 5-year kind of overarching strategy, and then each year we do an action plan where we show how we're going to use the funds that HUD has allocated to us to meet the goals and objectives in that 5-year plan. It also requires community engagement, and some of you have been involved with that. It's not quite as much community engagement. It doesn't last 5 months like it did with the consolidated plan, but we usually start this in January and have meetings to bring the public in and to get their feedback on what the community needs are. Annual action plans allow you to be responsive to change. So like 5 years ago is a great example. We had done all the work in 2019 for our 5-year consolidated plan that would have been turned in May of 2020. And do we all remember what happened in May of 2020? It's when COVID-19, the pandemic, happened. So, we had to really then work on that year 1 action plan to make sure that we could address some of those changing priorities. Funding changes, like 5 years ago. We got a whole lot of extra funding, and so we needed a plan that can be a little bit more flexible than the 5 years so that we can respond to those changing priorities in the community, changing financial and other resources. We also have an annual report of accomplishments that we do, and that's usually, we don't have a public hearing for it, but we do release it for public comment for a period of 15 days. And that public comment period will be in September of this year, and that will be a report on what we accomplished in the last year 5 of the 2020 to 2024 consolidated plan. So we have all of this information on our website. If you go to knoxville.tn.gov/development, look for reports and plans, you can find our previous consolidated plans. You can find our capers and our annual action plans and read a little bit more about what we did. We also have some boards at the back of the room, and when you came in, you might have just kind of glanced at them, but we encourage you to take a look at those. Those are the accomplishments for the first 4.5 years. We had a meeting in January as part of this process and wanted to show what had been accomplished through January or through December to share with you, what our goals were and then what some of our accomplishments were. So I encourage you to take a look at that when you're leaving. And I'm going to go to the next. This is our HUD entitlement funding. So normally our consolidated plan and our annual action plans are due by May 15th, and we submit those to HUD. But this year, because of the budget process, we actually didn't have a budget really until sometime in March, and so we got our numbers on May 14th. So one of the requirements with our action plan is you have to submit your actual numbers, your dollar amounts that you'll be receiving from HUD. And then that kicked in motion to turn in our consolidated plan and our year 1 action plan within 60 days. So that will be not this weekend, but the following weekend. So that kind of started the clock when we got our actual numbers in terms of making this final presentation. So for our CDBG funds, and that's Community Development Block Grant, we received about a $12,000 increase from last year. to about $1.63 million. Our home funds are still just a little bit under $1 million, but we did receive about a $12,000 increase in that amount from the prior year as well. And our emergency solutions grant funds, which are funds for homeless services, we received nothing from HUD for that. So we will not be getting a direct allocation of ESG funds for this first year. But before you panic, this has happened to us before. I think it might have been maybe my first action plan with the city. We had our ESG funds eliminated from HUD as well. But what we found that the state of Tennessee still gets their amount from HUD, and so they set aside a portion for the city of Knoxville. And they've assured us that they're going to do that again this year. So they've told us that we'll have about $125,000 to spend on homeless services and about $7,000 for administration of those grant funds. So we still have to go through a little bit of a process. We have to apply for the funds, but we received those funds from 2014 all the way through 2019 and 2020. Our funds were restored. So it isn't just happening to Knoxville. It's happened in other cities as well. And it isn't that they don't recognize that we have a need for these funds. It really has to do with some thresholds of funding. And we're fortunate that when this happened in 2014 and we lost our ESG funds from HUD, our city administration and our city council stepped up and provided us the difference. And then we got the THDA funds. So really, we kind of did better after we lost our direct allocation. And city council were so pleased that they have continued to put local dollars into homeless services. So you'll hear me as we go through the presentation. I'll call out when we're going to, what projects and what things that we'll be using those local homeless general fund dollars for. We can switch to the next one. So here's a graph to show you the kind of the rise and fall over time of these funds. And we've been getting HUD CDBG funds since 1989. And we've been getting our home funds since about 1990, I believe, 91. And ESG, I think we've been getting those funds I think since 1989 as well. Although, like I said, we did hit a period there where we weren't getting them directly from HUD. You see that big blip there between 2020 and 2022. Those were the additional funds that we got through the CARES Act and through the Recovery Act. So we got quite a bit of additional CDBG, ESG, and some home ARP funds that we are still we're still spending. The deadline for the ESG COVID funds was a couple of years ago, so we spent all those funds down. CDBG COVID funds, we just spent the last of those at the end of June this year, and our home American Recovery Program, our home ARP funds, we've got a deadline of 2030 to spend those, and most of those funds have been committed. I wanted to show you that, so in the background of this slide are those funds that we were just talking about, the HUD funds. And I have them faded because I really wanted to draw your attention to the local funds that have come in that the city of Knoxville has been putting in. So about 20, I don't know why it shows 2016. Actually, no, it does. It shows about 2014. The green line at the bottom, it's a darker green line. Those are those homeless general funds that the city has been putting in all along and continue to put in. And then the dark blue line, those are the affordable housing funds. So in 2017, Mayor O'Hara created an affordable rental development fund. And then in 2020, I think it was 2020, Mayor Kincannon and City Council were able to pass an ordinance that created an affordable housing fund. So we're not going to talk a lot about that tonight because that funding, as you can see, way surpasses even the most federal funds that we received during the COVID pandemic. And we continue to get those funds, and we appreciate that. And then I'm going to turn this over to Sherry, and she's going to talk a little bit about the community engagement timeline for the consolidated plan.
Hello, everyone. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the community engagement, the timeline, and the process. So the important thing to note here is that even though we began the consolidated plan kickoff in August of last year, prior to that, there were other initiatives that were going on outside of this timeline that we have incorporated into our plan. So this actually began in September of 2023 when we began the Missing Middle open houses. And then in December following that, we did the city's housing summit. And in January of 2024, we contracted with CSC to develop the Fair Housing Plan, which we released a draft of in July of last year. And in the meantime, in March, the city held the Mayor's Summit on Homelessness and released its updated housing strategy. And we did all that before our kickoff, which was August the 1st, for the consolidated plan. And we began our citizen engagement at that point, and we'll go into more detail on that in a moment. And that ran through from August through the end of October. And so in November, we spent time taking all the data that we'd collected, and we started putting it into a digestible format to come up with our draft of our goals and objectives and priorities, which we then presented in a public meeting very similar to this one in January of this year. So after we held that public meeting and got some final feedback from everyone, we finalized our priority goals and objectives in January. And in February, we began moving on to more research for the consolidated plan itself. We did an assessment of community resources and the capacity to meet priority goals and objectives. And at the same time, we also opened the funding applications for the year one programs. So the year one begins on July 1st, which is today. So we opened those applications back in February for the organizations. And then in the spring, we continued doing more research, gathering additional data with needs analysis and housing and market conditions, and we prepared the actual draft of the consolidated plan and the annual action plan, which we released on June 7th. And that began the 30-day public comment period that we're currently in. So right now we're at the July 1st public hearing on the timeline and still have a couple more steps. So this will go to City Council on the 8th, that's next Tuesday, for review and approval, and then after that we will submit it to HUD, hopefully by the deadline of July the 13th.
Definitely by the deadline.
Yes, by the deadline of July 13th. So to go into a little more detail about how we actually engage the citizens in this process, well, it actually began before the kickoff, as we discussed with the Fair Housing Plan that we started researching. And then we have the kickoff on August the 1st. And the department does a fun thing when they do the kickoff. They go down to the main floor of the city-county building where the department is, and they put up the Knoxville needs boards, and they engage with the citizens that are there in the department or in the building, just doing their daily business, and talk to them about what the department is doing, and they let them write down the needs, what they think Knoxville needs, and post it up on the board. And it's a great way to get a visual of what they want out of their community. So we also started the kickoff on social media at that point, and the kickoff was really to start publicizing this community needs survey that the city had put together. So this survey went live. It was from August 1st to October the 31st, and they did this on social media. They put it in Office of Neighborhood Empowerment's weekly newsletter. They took flyers out all over, so it was posted in every government building. We took flyers to libraries, community buildings. We took them to the locations of a lot of the different local organizations that we work with. And altogether we got 540 respondents on the survey, so that was really good. Bailey in a moment will go over some more details about the survey itself. And while we were doing this, we were also doing public meetings. We did 2 public meetings in September, one during the daytime, one during the evening, and both of them were hybrid. So that could accommodate a lot of different schedules. And during the meetings themselves, we provided polling software so the people in the meetings could take the survey and provide these answers in real time. And in addition to engaging with the general public, we also did several focus groups. We worked with the Mayor's Council on Disability Issues, the Youth Action Board, KnoxWorks participants, the Affordable Housing Interest Group, the African American Equity Restoration Task Force, the Knox County Homeless Coalition, Knox Pride, Neighborhood Advisory Council, and the Construction Career Ladder Roundtable. We had a total of 99 participants across these to discuss what they think the city needs. And we also sent out questionnaires to different community agencies and partners, almost 24 of them. We got responses from 8 of them. And Power Knox, CAC, KUB, Bridge Refugee Services, Legal Aid, Knox Pride, Knox Asian Festival, and the McNabb Center about what they wanted to see in the community going forward. And then on top of that, as I mentioned, we had a lot of initiatives that were going on outside of the time plan and the work directly on the consolidated plan. And we didn't want all that work and all that knowledge and experience to go to waste. So we really drew on a lot of these different plans that were available. So there was the equity plan, just a few examples, the housing strategy plan, the community needs assessment provided by CAC, the Knox HMIS annual report. We drew off all of that to inform our program going forward. And I will turn it over to Bailey to talk more about the survey and the results.
This is our microphone today, so we have to awkwardly carry it around. Right. So, as Sherry said, we had a online community needs survey. It was available in English and in Spanish. This was an example of the flyers that we distributed. It was a QR code you could scan and take the survey. We had 540 responses. About 35 of those were paper write-ins that people gave to us with their feedback. But within the survey, we asked people what their priority community needs were in 9 different categories. And those were neighborhood needs, home ownership needs, rental housing needs, homeless needs, housing services for specific populations, economic development needs, public service needs, public infrastructure needs, and public facility needs. And then we asked, of those categories, which 3 are the most important or urgent to you? And then lastly, we asked for some demographic information. And I'm going to go over a little bit of what we heard. If you want the presentation where I gave like the full results is on our website. It's also, if you want to see the full survey and everyone's responses, that's also an attachment on the consolidated plan, which is on our website. So you can take a look at that. We're going to go over a bit of it here now. So looking at who took our survey. On the left here, this is showing across the bottom the age ranges of the participants, and the number at the top is the total number of people in that category. So you can see our largest group, about 28%, were age 25 to 34. And then some other highlights, 55% identify as female, 21% have or live with someone who has a disability, and 9% identified as LGBTQIA+. This shows race and ethnicity. You see that 69% identify as white, just as a subtotal, 18% identified as BIPOC, 11% as Black or African American, and about 11%, which just all the percent there, did not answer the question or left it blank. And unfortunately, this question wasn't set up in a way that allowed people to indicate more than one category, so someone couldn't say if they were white and Hispanic, for example, so everyone could only select one in each of these categories. And we also asked about income. Before I talk about this, the chart on the left, let me explain a little bit about how this is broken down. So this is, people are grouped into what we call their area median income categories. And so each year HUD releases annual income limits, and that lets us know who is eligible for these programs that we're funding. And so just as a baseline, the area median income for a family of 4 living in Knoxville in 2004 when we did the survey was $91,000. So what that would mean is, if, let's say, take a family of 4, and let's say you make $50,000, so you're making 68 or something percent of $91,000. So you fall in this category down here to be 51 to 80%. Take that same family of 4 and say you make $80,000. You are above that 80% AMI, but you're still below the median. So why do we even ask this question? Our services are supposed to be provided to people who are in that 0 to 80% category of AMI. So we really want to hear specifically what is of interest to them. So going back over to the chart, you'll see that 51% were over 80%, and 30 were low to moderate income, that's 0 to 80% AMI. And then about 19% did not provide a response. And then housing status, 55% were homeowners, 32% were renters. We also asked people in the past 12 months, have you had trouble making a mortgage payment, rent payment, or utility payment? Homeowners, about 18% of them said yes, and then renters, about 58% said yes. And we didn't have enough responses for data to be provided on this, but I will say that of the homeowners who were LMI, low to moderate income, they were more likely to say that they did have trouble making a payment. So just some context there as well. And so then I said that we asked everyone to pick their top 3, the most important of those categories. And so they were in order here: homelessness, rental housing, infrastructure, public services, homeownership, specific populations, economic development, neighborhood needs, and public facilities. Specific populations, we don't go into that in the next few slides, so I'll just mention that might be people with disabilities related to like mobility, mental illness, drug and alcohol, like just the specific categories that were provided. Again, you can see them fully listed on the attachment or the appendix on the con plan. And then that was obviously overall, but looking at some specific groups and how they answered, you can see there's still like a pattern. Here, I'll show you again. So the top are homelessness, rental, infrastructure, public services. So we look at like low to moderate income individuals, that's about 30% of respondents. You still see rental, homelessness, and they had economic development, which is different from the overall. For the BIPOC individuals, rental housing, homelessness, and public services. For homeowners, homelessness, infrastructure, and rental housing. And then for renters, we see rental housing, homelessness, and infrastructure. So overall, we're still seeing a pattern, but it's important to look at different populations and see what was important to them. And then I'll just go through the top 2 categories, but to show you homeless needs were the top priority need. And within that, these are the things that people could select. Depending on the question, they could pick 3 or 4 that were more important to them. And so in order, those were homelessness prevention services, permanent supportive housing, rapid housing services, emergency shelter and other short-term housing, employment and economic stability, supportive services connecting people to resources, street outreach, and extreme weather shelter. And the last one we'll look at, for rental housing, they have rental assistance, eviction prevention services, rehab, which include emergency and minor home repairs, energy efficiency improvements, new rental property construction, accessibility improvements, broadband internet access, and lead paint screen and abatement. And then we also, outside the survey, we had those focus groups and consultations. We also just had some qualitative feedback, so we tried to summarize some of what we heard here. So we heard you say Knoxville has housing needs. Related to affordable housing, we heard we need permanent supportive housing, gap funding to increase housing stock, affordable housing, that also is like paired with supportive services to help people maintain their housing, incentives for ADA units above the basic requirements. Some of this text you see in purple was pulled from that fair housing plan process, so it's kind of pulled it through here as well. More affordable single-family homes, workforce housing, and incentives for people to become a Section 8 landlord. Related to homeownership, more money for homeownership and more inventory, foreclosure prevention and property tax assistance, home repair services to keep people in their homes, programs to move renters to owners, such like down payment assistance, and then housing and services for individuals, for those individuals who are experiencing high service needs that exceed permanent supportive housing, for those discharged from mental hospitals to the streets, those aging out of foster care, those lacking income and insurance for nursing home, veterans, survivors of human trafficking, refugees and Asian families. And then housing navigation services, including a functional accessible housing unit database, a housing database for all income levels, and and what was described as like the New Jersey model or one-stop shop housing navigation location. We also heard you say that Knoxville has social service needs. Regarding homelessness prevention, services that focus on keeping people housed, education on tenants' rights and options during the eviction process, eviction prevention assistance, including rent or utility assistance for individuals and families who have been to court or have an eviction notice, KCS families that are precariously housed, and refugee populations. Emergency shelter services, shelters for different types of family situations, such as like a family shelter, non-faith-based options, shelters specific to young adults and college students, seniors with disabilities, LGBTQIA plus affirming, and shared shelters like low barriers to entry. For public facilities, a drop-in center where individuals, especially youth and young adults, can access internet, phone, food, laundry, and hygiene supplies, and accessibility improvements for public facilities. And some other social services, free affordable medical, dental, and mental health care, more affordable child care to support working parents, programs for those over the age of 17, around 17, to transition to adulthood, financial empowerment programs, including homebuyer education, workforce training, including apprenticeships and pre-apprenticeship programs, and food banks and more like accessible locations. And lastly, we heard you have Knoxville neighborhood needs. As far as infrastructure goes, public transportation, like last mile transportation, that is like where you like get dropped off, like your house is still like a mile down the road, like it's not dropping you off right there. Micro transit options, sidewalk connectivity, just like places where like the sidewalk just suddenly ends for a little while and doesn't connect all the way to where you're trying to go. Around public transit stops, free water and bathroom access in the downtown area. More specific neighborhoods, incentives for commercial development and businesses to revitalize neighborhoods, geographically equitable grocery stores, repurposing buildings the city owns into housing, resources to help neighborhoods organize, to form like neighborhood organizations, support for nonprofits, meeting spaces for organizers and free community meeting spaces, land bank for nonprofit developers, funding support to support nonprofit staff and capacity building, and some other things, resources to kind of combat NIMBYism, help with plans review and inspection challenges, raising the minimum wage, better foster parent, this is from one of our KnoxWorks focus return, better foster care parent screening, and home repair contractors. And I'm gonna pass it off to you, Linda.
Thank you, Bailey. Knoxville has a lot of need. So I'm going to take you, I guess, clockwise around this. So you heard us tell you that public feedback was very important to developing this plan. Consultation with local experts was very important. Research and looking at local data, you know, what people were telling us, was that matching with what the data was telling us? We looked at complementary initiatives. And we came up with a lot of really important needs to consider. But we have to add in there that our funding, our capacity. I talked to you a little bit about the funding that we are being allocated from HUD. We have some prior year funding. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that when I get into talking about year one. But we also have regulatory constraints with our HUD funds. There's also capacity in the community. We may have a need that was a high priority need, but maybe nobody who delivers that service. So there were a lot of things that we had to take into consideration when we came up with what we were actually going to fund. So some of those budgetary and regulatory constraints. So community development block grant is the most flexible form of funding that we receive from housing and urban development. But they have a 15% cap on public services. So only 15% of our allocation can pay for social services. There's a cap on grants administration. But other things that it can fund that it doesn't have a cap are housing rehabilitation, public facility improvements, and economic development initiatives. With our home investment partnerships, Grant Program, or HOME for short, spent on affordable housing for very low-income Knoxville residents. There's a requirement that we have to set aside, so it's the opposite of a cap. There's a requirement to set aside 15% of our home allocation each year for community housing development organizations, or CHODOs for short. And these are organizations that they have to meet some pretty strict requirements that HUD sets. They have to have local residents and low to moderate income people on their boards. And we work with 3 CHODOs in Knoxville at this time. And so we set aside at least 15%. I don't think since I've been with the city that we've actually done 15%. It's usually been closer to 40%. But we're required to do 15%. There's also a cap on administration expenses, and there is a required local match. Our Emergency Solutions Grant, which I told you we're not getting any for the 25-26 year, but there's a requirement that only 65% of those funds can be used on emergency shelter and services and street outreach services. There's a cap on administration, and there's also a 1-to-1 match requirement for those funds. And I'm going to introduce Kevin now to talk a little bit about the overview of our goals.
Knoxville has a lot of needs, and you saw the breadth of conversations we've had over, various needs in our community. We have to figure out what's the highest priority. We did this in this priority. Surprisingly, probably to no one, homelessness and housing are, 2 highest needs. And from that, we set our goals. And so our goals moving forward, and you're going to see how our strategy is based on these 4 goals in just a minute, starts with keeping folks housed. That's the number 1 priority. Housing stability, figuring out a way to keep people in their homes. How do we do that? One is through, repairing homes that are threatened. It's nothing like an owner-occupant who becomes homeless, right? So if a person's low or moderate income, we can help them. We also fund a wide variety of partners to do homelessness assistance, to get people back into their homes who have lost their housing, and a wide variety of things. So that keep people housed is the majority of what this federal funding will be used for. The second goal is encourage housing development. Why is that important? Well, the root cause of the housing crisis is that nationwide, we went through a 15-year period where we didn't build enough houses. And so we have a shortage of houses in our city, which allowed landlords to charge whatever. It's a supply and demand issue, so we have to encourage, and the participants in the meetings understood that, and that's the reason why it came up as a priority. Now, primarily, we don't use federal funds for that goal. We do some activities to support it. Primarily, due to mayor and our wonderful council, our local affordable housing fund has allowed us to kick off 2,600 units in a little over 5 years and leverage about $700 million in the process just by providing gap financing. Third goal is we want to transform blighted properties. And I don't mean, downtown Market Square. What we're talking about is problem properties in neighborhoods, those nuisance properties. It's figuring out a way to take those and provide affordable housing and other attainable housing opportunities for people to live in. And then the fourth one, and this is very important in a tight housing market, is we have to promote housing fairness. Fair housing means when people are unfairly prevented from accessing housing, all right? And so we have done a concurrent study with this consolidated plan to evaluate our fair housing, and there's some work to do on that. And so those are the 4 goals that Linda's going to break down a little bit further, that's going to correspond with how we are not only using funds, but seeking other funds in these next 5 years.
Thank you. So I'm going to direct you to look at your handout now. Did everybody get a handout, or can you look on with a neighbor? We ran out. Is there anyone who is missing one? Okay.
Only the back.
Oh, back.
People in the back.
Do you all mind to share one of your, can you share and maybe give one back, pass one back?
All right, thank you. Yeah, come
Oh,
on.
they already did it up here. They got it. Thank you. I pick on you guys because you're up front. Thank you. So we presented this information at our January meeting, and we had a draft goals, objectives, and activities handout, and then took feedback on them. What we wanted to tell you what we heard from the community, what we researched through this process, and what we believed were high priority. And HUD asked you to do high and low priorities. So we had some high priorities, we had some low priorities, we had some things that are required. And I talked a little bit about some of those requirements. So we broke down, looking at all those different needs and identified those that were high priority and low priority, presented them to you all to get feedback. We made some revisions to that, and we came up with this final list of high priority goals and objectives. And this is what we based our February, Sherry talked about the cycle that we had in February to take grant applications for the funds. And so we based those priorities were what we based the funding on. So again, if we didn't have an organization that could meet a high priority goal, then that may have fell off. So that's the final list, and this slide gives you a little bit of an idea of how we prioritize those. And I'm going to move in now to talking about, and this is for the whole 5 years. But again, as our funding fluctuates, as the needs in our community fluctuate over the coming 4 years, those can remain somewhat flexible. We don't often change them wholesale, but again, it's like we had in the pandemic, when you have something, and I hope that nothing happens like that this time, but when you have big changes, then we can make an argument to change some of those 5-year goals and objectives. But this is what will guide us for the next 5 years. And now I'm going to move into talking about year 1. So this is the 2025-2026 annual action plan. And I talked a little bit about this already. It meets the goals and objectives of the consolidated plan. It's also due to HUD by July 13th. We received our notice of our annual allocation on May 14th. So it covers projects that start today and go through June 30th. And if we had unlimited funds, we would maybe be able to fund some of the other high priority objectives and maybe even some low priority. But we had to make decisions, hard decisions, very hard decisions about what we would focus on. But we are identifying those in the action plan, the draft action plan that we want to get your feedback on. These can be applications that we receive from community partners and also internal programs like owner-occupied and rental housing rehab that we occupy, or that we provide with our own housing and neighborhood development staff. So to look at the funding that we have available for this first year, just looking at Community Development Block Grant First, or CDBG, our federal allocation again was about $1.63 million. We do have some prior year funds that went unspent. So we cobble those together and see what we have left that we can add to the budget. And we also anticipate receiving program income from CDBG sources. And we receive program income right now only through our owner-occupied housing rehab program. So if we help somebody who's low to moderate income to make repairs to their home, oftentimes they will enter into a loan program with us, and then they make a payment, and that payment that comes back is called program income. And depending on how much of the CDBG or home funds we put into it, that's where the program income goes back to. So we are anticipating receiving about $90,000. This amount has been going down fairly steadily as our federal grants have been going down. We've been spending more home program income and receiving more of that with owner-occupied housing rehab than we are with CDBG. So we are also actively looking at ways in which we can generate more program income. But it's hard to raise program income because the people that you're assisting are low to moderate income, so it's then difficult, to then, try to have them pay for, pay for services or pay for housing. But with our owner-occupied housing program, this actually works pretty well. So we have a total of about $1.93 million available for CDBG funding in the next year. As we discussed with our ESG funds, we aren't getting any through HUD, but we do anticipate getting some through THDA, and we'll also have some homeless general funds that are contributed by the city of Knoxville. And lastly, our home investment partnership program, our federal allocation fell below $1 million last year, and even though we got a slight increase, we're still sitting at about $944,000. We have quite a bit of home prior year funds, so we have about $2.9 million. Not all of it is unencumbered. Some of those are committed to projects that we have in a pipeline, but we also have those funds to once we have that pipeline kind of continues. We don't stop taking applications and then open it up again. We take home applications year round. So we expect to be able to have quite a bit of that to apply to projects that are starting in the next year. We also anticipate about $500,000 in home program income, and again, that is because we do a lot of our loans with low to moderate income homeowners, and we get that back as program income when they make their payments. So we have about $4.36 million available in home funds. So the total is about $6.29 million in funds that we can allocate to projects in this next year. So if we go to the next slide, we're gonna work within the framework of those goals and priorities. So that handout that you have, you can follow along if you want, but we've also put them on the screen. So in that first goal that Kevin was discussing about keeping people housed, or keep people housed, the objective was housing rehabilitation. So this can include owner-occupied rehabilitation. So those are like code-related, safe and health-related repairs that need to be made to people's homes who are low to moderate income and who live in the city of Knoxville. We also work with sub-recipients, sub-grantees, nonprofit organizations that do emergency home repair that don't have any loan. Those are granted. And that can also include energy efficiency and weatherization to their homes. We work with sub-grantees for minor home repair. So these could include accessibility modifications if somebody needs a ramp built to their home. And we can, this isn't just homeowners, we can also help renters with that program as well. And then, of course, we have the substantial repair, which is our owner-occupied rehab program, which can include lead-based paint remediation. And we actually just received a new grant that will be, I think it's, correct me, $4 million over 4 years. I think that's correct.
It's 400,000 in lead and then 750,000 in public homes.
Thank
So that's
you.
a supplement to that.
Yes, we have a supplement to that lead program, but we have that for 4 years. And so we can pair that with our owner-occupied housing rehab program and be able to kind of give them a double bang for their buck. We also, so for owner-occupied then, we've set aside about $2.2 million and anticipate completing about 143 housing units, or 143 low to moderate income households will benefit from that. Rental rehabilitation, we have set aside $1.34 million and expect to be able to impact 18 units. And it's not just 18 households, because rental units do turn over, and we expect for the rental rehab for the improvements to last a period of time. So it's 18 units, but it's probably more households than that. And we also have housing project delivery expenses in there, all the things that are required to be able to complete these programs. So we've set aside 65% of our budget, or $4 million, for these housing rehabilitation programs under Keeping People Housed. The next goal under Keep People Housed are homeless services. And we are using all of our, remember I told you that our public services were capped at 15% of our community development block grant funds. And we're using all of that 15% for homeless services. And then in the red are the homeless general funds, that are the local funds that will help support that. So we've set aside, of the HUD funds, only 3%, or $199,000. It actually comes out to be a little bit more than the 15%, because we have some prior year funds that during COVID, HUD gave us an exemption that we didn't have to meet that 15% requirement. So we still have, I think, maybe $4,000 or $5,000 that were not spent that we can put back into public services. So, but it ends up being about 3% of the total budget. And we anticipate being able to provide 104 individuals with rapid rehousing services and 327 individuals with emergency shelter and services. The next objective is eviction prevention, and that is also considered a homelessness prevention. So that's also part of that public service 15%. So we have set aside $50,000, or a little bit less than 1% of the total HUD budget, and anticipate serving 53 individuals. And those funds will go to a sub-grantee who has experience with providing those services. Next, under Keep People Housed, the objective is economic empowerment and financial resilience. So we identified mortgage readiness, including home buyers assistance, and have set aside 4% of our total funds, or $275,000, to help low to moderate income people to get into their first home. And we anticipate helping 4 low to moderate income home buyers with that program. And we've had internal conversations about about being able to continue to impact low to moderate income people into owning a home. We have so much need for rental housing, but we know that owning a home is really the key to wealth building and the key to families really getting on their feet. So we have set aside funds and hope to be able to complete 4 units and have 4 low to moderate income households become home owners. Let's see, moving down, the next slide is, the next goal is encourage housing development, and the objective is affordable housing. New rental construction, as Kevin was talking about, is absolutely critical to being able to bring costs down. We aren't setting aside any of our home funds for that, except for partnering with our CHODOs. Remember that I told you we had to set aside at least 15% of our home funds to be able to work with those community housing development organizations. And we've set aside $1.35 million and hope to complete 22. And they could be a combination of acquisition of property, and rehab of single-family housing. It could be acquisition of property and rehab of multifamily rental housing, or it could be new construction of affordable housing. But we anticipate being able to get 22 units of that. Under the objective of accessible housing with services, permanent supportive housing is a huge need. And that is something that we are really focusing on with our Affordable Housing Fund to be able to provide permanent supportive housing. And we've got some really good numbers. I talked about those boards, and I really, again, encourage you to look at that when you leave so that you can see how many permanent supportive housing units have been created to help people who are experiencing homelessness, how many have been created with the Affordable Housing Fund. And then last under this, actually the next goal is transform blighted properties, and the objective is design planning. This is for development that happens in the city's redevelopment areas. And we've set aside $25,000, a little less than 1% of our HUD funds to be able to help provide design assistance so that we can help to provide, or help to really transform not only the blighted properties, but to really transform neighborhoods in these redevelopment areas in the city. And last are some long-term priorities. We can't address everything in 1 year. We have 5 years in which we can attempt to meet some of these goals. But longer-term priorities include promoting housing fairness. The objective is connecting people to resources. We want to be able to establish a housing resource center with housing navigation services. This would be something that we envision as being open to any household in Knoxville, in the city of Knoxville, at whatever income level. Because promoting housing fairness means that you open up all areas for opportunity for people to live and to have their choice about where they want to live. So we want to have that be open to to any household who desires that in Knoxville. We want to create an accessible housing database, and I was excited talking to our team today that there's already been some rumblings about how we might be able to get this kick-started. So we're excited about doing that and think that that will have great progress or great promise. Economic mobility programs are something that we really want to see happen. We spent a lot of our previous consolidated plan, the 2020 to 2024 consolidated plan, working on workforce development and establishing a career ladder, construction career ladder pipeline. And I'm happy to say that those, even though we're not still able to put money into those programs, they continue. And so we want to be able to find ways to augment those. And then lastly is really prioritizing opportunity and site selection for multifamily housing. So this has, again, to do with housing choice and people being able to live where they want to live in the city of Knoxville and having the resources to help connect them to that housing. And it's the site selection, whenever, we don't ever really choose sites where we're going to do work. We get approached by developers who have an idea and have a plan, and the days, you saw that chart where the funding used to be a lot higher, but the days of us being able to be the only funder in a project, those days are long gone. So we really use these funds to help provide that gap financing. So when a developer, nonprofit or for-profit developer, approaches us with an idea, they also come with those funding resources. They come with their, with their investment strategies, and we put it through some rigorous testing to make sure that it's something that that's going to work for our funding. But choosing where they're going to build that. That's something that we can talk with them about and make sure that we're providing opportunities in all parts of the city for all people to choose where they want to live. Did you want to add anything to that one, Evan?
Well done.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm going to turn it back to Bailey to talk a little bit more about our timeline. And we are going to get to you, I promise. You'll have your opportunity to have your say.
There's only 2 slides, I promise. So I'll look at the timeline. This will be the timeline overall. So you see that we have finalized our draft goals and objectives. The year one application opened late January, ran through February. We released the draft of the consolidated plan and one-year action plan on June 7th. The 30-day public comment period is right now, runs through July 7th. The public meeting that's happening right now on July 1. And looking ahead, City Council, this plan will have to be approved by City Council. It'll go to them on July 8th. And then everything goes well, this plan is due to HUD on July 13th. And then the first year the first annual action plan, the PY 2025-2026, begins on July 1st, which is of course today. But what that means is that when we do take these to council, when we take the projects to council later, they approve those will be retroactive to July 1, so they'll have the whole program here. And thank you. That's all we have for you for the presentation. But we invite you to stay and share your feedback. We're going to break out in some different groups to collect your feedback. If you'd like some more information or to view the full draft plan, that's on our webpage. That's at knoxville.gov/consolidated plan. If you're not able to view it online, you can also come to our office, which is at 400 Main Street, the City County Building, or contact Linda Rust. That's her phone number. We also have some of our business cards in the back you can take. And we're going to accept comments on this through July 7th. That's when the comment period ends. You can send those by mail to the address here, or by email to Linda, which again, our cards are there in the back. But, yeah, so, and then I guess, Linda, do you want to take us into some groups?
Yeah, so if we can maybe separate into 4 groups, and I guess depending on where you are in the room, maybe you all can come up to the front, you all can move towards the back, you all can come up to the front, maybe split, but let's break it into 4 groups if we can. And then the back, if you can go to that back corner. And we're going to give you a facilitator, and we can answer questions. We're going to take your feedback.